Hello everybody. We are very pleased that you can join us today for this webinar. My name is Astrid and I'm happy to welcome you to the Future Studio Discussion Club. As many of you know, here in Future Studio, we are discussing everything related to the future of Armenia and the world. I know that the most of us are very concerned about the current situation in the world. That's why we decided to launch a series of the webinars under the umbrella COVID-19 Defying Universal Fear. We started discussing how the virus affects our lives in various aspects, and especially healthcare industry. Different experts of healthcare from different countries joined us to help people to deal with fear. This series of webinars will be hosted by Future Studio and powered by our partners, Foundation of Armenian Science and Technologies. Today, we will talk about the domestic violence, and our speakers will point out why it's urgent to address domestic violence during the ongoing isolation related with COVID-19 crisis. So I'm happy to introduce our speakers, Dr. Shakeh Kaftarian, psychologist, co-president of the Armenian American Mental Health Association of Southern California, and her colleague, Maro Matosian, founder of the Women's Support Center in Yerevan and one of the founding members of the Coalition to Stop Violence Against Women, and expert in the field by the Council of Europe. Dr. Kaftarian is one of the most loyal readers of At the Crossroads discussion paper, and we are very glad to host you, Shakeh Jan, with Mrs. Matosian on this webinar. Dear speakers, the stage is all yours, please.
Thank you very much, Astrid, and many thanks to Future Studios and Fast Foundation for inviting us and for entertaining this extremely important topic, domestic violence, which is a pervasive issue across the world, not necessarily only limited to Armenia. So, as Astrid already mentioned, this COVID virus pandemic, Hamajarak pandemic that has captured the entire world. It's not limited to one country, one community, or even one part of the world. It has spread across the world, and it has put a great deal of pressure on all systems of society. Not only individuals, but all of the structures, the social system, the health system, the security systems of the countries, the financial structures of the countries, and globally speaking. So this major, mammoth, and unprecedented stressor that has descended upon us has created an extraordinary situation within families as well. The physical distancing issue that is in most parts of the world a mandated rule, which says that families need to sequester themselves, need to stay within the confines of their homes because of the fact that this virus is extremely contagious. And by doing so, they're trying to create herd immunity without fracturing the health systems. So this issue of physical distancing has created several unprecedented and unusual situations in the family. Family members have to stay within within their houses, within their places of residence. There are issues pertaining to more frequent conflicts, arguments in average families. But when it comes to families where there's history of domestic violence, that is an issue that concerns us. Maro and I have been entertaining this issue. We have been talking to experts. We have been talking to people on the ground. And we decided that we have to address this issue. And FAST Foundation and Future Studios decided to partner with us. So this isolation of families, as I said, brings about a more intensified situation for domestic violence. I would like to ask my partner here, Maro Matosian, who is an expert in domestic violence, who is an advocate of the rules and regulations on the books of Armenia about domestic violence, to help us better understand what domestic violence is. Maro, would you please define domestic violence for us? What are the risk factors? What are some of the characteristics that we as a society need to really understand? And what are some of the causes? Maro will make an initial presentation of all of this information, and then we will ask questions. We will ask questions of the audience, and we will then discuss more detail pertaining to domestic violence. Maro, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you, Shakeh. Thank you. Thank you for that introduction, which really points out to the unique situation that we are in right now. Now, in the midst cases of domestic violence and during this pandemic. So the question, Shakeh, is very accurate that you're asking. Why, first of all, why this situation? And what is exactly domestic violence? Many think that domestic violence is just a conflict, an argument we have among couples. We raise our voices, we slam the door, but that's not it. When we have an argument in a normal relationship, we are not afraid to raise our voice. We're not afraid to say what we want, what we have on our mind. And we're not afraid of repercussions from the partner. I have to say that during my presentation, I refer to women as victims because 94% of the victim population are women. So that's what I'm referring to. So we are not afraid of that, of arguing when the situation is more of an equal relationship between partners. But when we talk about domestic violence, we talk about gender inequality, meaning that the perpetrator or the husband, let's say, he is using power and control. He is dominating the victim. He is, he considers that the victim is his possession. He's entitled to do whatever he wants. And even we had a perpetrator at our center who said that he decides when his wife will live or when she will die. I mean, to that extreme of control. So the dynamic is completely different. Secondly, the abuse, the acts of violence are cyclical and are repetitive. They are constantly happening and they increase in intensity and they can be even fatal. And as you know, there are many deaths given to domestic violence. So domestic violence also comes in many forms. It's a very complex issue that we don't have now time to discuss all the aspects of it, but it is physical, which is understandable, the beatings. And it also psychological, meaning that the victim humiliates, puts down, insults, plays mind games. You know, if you have heard about gaslighting, when through those towards that the mind games, the woman feels that she's going crazy because she knows that she put a cup somewhere and the husband said, no, it's not there. So her mind. So, and also there is the other aspect of domestic violence that it imposes on the women to do acts of sexual acts not to her, not acceptable to her, not in agreement with her, not wanting, and so forth. And also it's economic violence. Economic violence is something less understood. It's not when you, tell your child don't eat ice cream, but it's when you use that argument of economic, the financial issue as a tool, as a way of again humiliating and making the victim dependent on the perpetrator, not giving her money to buy bread, asking her to beg for money for medicine, or for very basic things in the household. We have heard during this time that the victim would beg for buying soap, for example, that she needs to wash her hands. So when I'm talking about the cyclical aspect of domestic violence, I'd also, it's because it's an aggravating period, a period of accumulation of negative feelings, and then there is the violent act, and then comes the honeymoon period, what we call it, when the perpetrator apologizes, he gives gifts to the woman, and this is the most dangerous phase because he offers hope to the victim, and she thinks that, okay, he will not do it again, or he realized that this was bad and it will not happen again. And and in order for her to save the family, she breaks the ego and the will of the victim. And also what happens is that the victim herself is affected by trauma. Now, trauma is something very complex. Shakeh, you know about the effects of PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, and the effects that it has on your ability to make decisions, your ability to remember, your ability to express yourself. And all this contributes to this really helpless situation of the victim. And many times, even when the victim comes out, the police doesn't understand her. They think that she might be lying because she doesn't remember things. She cannot express herself. So this is a very dangerous situation. I want to say that trauma also affects children because they are witnessing to this abuse, and the scars on a child are very much for life sometimes, and we see the effects of that. So the victim, as I mentioned, is in constant fear, and violence will break out, pretexts, and the woman tries to please the husband, to make sure that she can avoid an incident, but she cannot, and this continues continuously and over the years. And the victim really feels like a hostage when this happens, and she also becomes very vulnerable. So now we're coming to the next question, Shakeh. Why is this now intensifies during the coronavirus? Well, the emergency order, the state of emergency requires that we stay indoors, right? We stay isolated. So for the victim, the home is the most unsafe place for her because she is in proximity with the abuser at all times. An abuser who maybe lose his job, he doesn't have revenue, he's in fear of getting sick. So all these are contributing to the stressor, and the victim is really a hostage in that home, and at the whim of this perpetrator who at any moment can burst and abuse the victim. So the proximity is a very dangerous situation. I want to say that why is this raises the alarm? Because, for example, in the developed countries where women have iPhones and WhatsApp and Viber and laptops and internet connectivity and all that, they have more facility, there are more means to reach out to the to support centers or to the police to inform them about abuse. Whereas Armenian women, unfortunately, the vast majority do not have these capabilities, do not have internet, do not have access. The abuser many times don't even allow them to have a phone. It's very difficult to reach out. This is in extreme cases, or they are monitored at all time. I mean, we had a woman saying that, you know, I couldn't even have privacy to go to the bathroom on my own because they are constantly under that supervision and under that control. So obviously that in the developed country, in the Western world, for example, the calls intensifies of domestic violence. We have not yet noticed such an increase in Armenia, but this doesn't have to say that there is not. And also we have to understand that in the Western world, the police as first responders, they are much more strict and are much more forceful to protect the victim and to separate her from the abuser, whereas in Armenia that is not the case necessarily. So this all contributes to this situation where women do not come out that easily. We don't have a national hotline number, and therefore women do not know where to call necessarily. On this occasion, I want to mention our center's hotline number, which is 099 88 78 08, and I want to say it in Armenian also. 099 88 78 08. And
նորից կրկնեք խնդրեմ հայերենով
099 88 78 08. And we work 24 hours around the clock. You can call, and it's very important to reach out, and we can give also counseling over the phone during these times. Shakeh, I would appreciate if you can ask me some questions and direct me the areas that you'd like to cover.
Well, thank you. This was very informative, Maro. And one major question I have, which also many people have, is domestic violence preventable? Can the woman or can anyone do anything to prevent the perpetrator, the person who is the cause of domestic violence, the one that is committing domestic violence? Can there be anything to prevent that? To prevent the person from acting on their anger or whatever it may be and create domestic violence in the family?
Well, on a personal level, there are signs when we start dating somebody, there are signs of what would be a controlling relationship. For example, many times the boyfriend would say, I don't want you to make friends with these people. I don't want you to go there. I want you to dress this way. Don't do this, don't do that. And you or constantly telephoning, constantly finding out where you are, what are you doing. Those are signs of a controlling behavior. However, many young women confuse this with, oh, he loves me, or he is very jealous. Jealousy is a huge indicator of controlling behavior. And they confuse this with love, with attention. Many young women think that, okay, if once we get married, he will change. Then you said, once we have children, he will change. When we have a son, he will change. But none of this works. Once you have this type of a behavior, that you notice this type of a behavior, you must understand you're entering into a very dangerous, very controlling relationship. As in a society, as a country, how we prevent? Well, as the saying says, it takes a village. You cannot, it's not a law that can prevent, it's not the police only that then prevent domestic violence. It takes the entire society. And by this, I mean that when we notice or when somebody is affected by domestic violence, whether that person can go through the school, or the school identifies children that come from domestic violence families, or the hospital, the doctor, a neighbor, everybody in society, when they notice this, then they have to raise the alarm, then they have to intervene. Unfortunately, in Armenia, domestic violence is still taboo. Nobody wants to interfere in the business of the other person's family. And this creates this atmosphere of impunity. Because the perpetrator is never made accountable, and accountability is the most important thing to preventing domestic violence. We need laws that criminalize domestic violence, that punish the perpetrator. We don't have severe punishments for perpetrators. So it's a comprehensive, it's a many-part system that needs to be put in place for. You need to have more support centers, shelters, all these that prevent domestic violence.
Right, right. So you really touched on several different issues. I'd like to go back to the responsibility issue. Whose responsibility is it to either report or step in or to somehow intervene in the cycle of violence that may be happening in a family? For example, you alluded to the fact that there are friends and relatives and neighbors and people in different structures, like the school system, healthcare system, etc., that needs to step in. That is true. And I would like to go back to the issue of tradition. Traditionally, we think as Armenians that the family is a sacred structure. It has a very high level of privacy that should never be interfered with, that the man is the head of the household, and anything that happens under his auspices is okay, and that stepping in and preventing an unwanted violent situation is interference in that traditionally sacred, structure. How can we actually address that? Is it really a choice when you see something untoward, something violent happening? Is this the choice of the person to stay silent or not? Or is this really a moral responsibility to talk about it, to bring it up, to call the police, or even step in the family structure and say, hey, stop it? So do people, whether they're individuals in society or, actors in systems, such as doctors, such as teachers, do they have the moral responsibility in the absence of legal responsibility that you were talking about?
Very valid questions, Shakeh. Yes, I think everybody has a moral responsibility because domestic violence is a human rights violation. And that nobody has the right to abuse another person, and nobody deserves to be abused. So yes, the responsibility is huge, it's on everybody, and we need to intervene. I want to only be careful and say that intervening when the abuse takes place and intervening in that family can be dangerous. So the best thing is to call the police or and report that you're listening to violence and that it's a violent situation. But the best thing is for medical professionals, for school teachers, to call support centers and not to call the police, because the woman might not be ready to go, and allowing the police to come in might aggravate the situation. But the support center, the social worker talks to the woman, talks to the victim, discusses the issue, offers her a safety plan, assesses her risk for lethality, if she's in risk of being killed, actually, and gives her options for her to choose what to do. Us as relatives and friends, I know many times that they call in desperation that we have to do something about it, and they say that, and they tell the victim, do call the center, do this, do that. And sometimes we as friends and relatives take the role of the perpetrator, where we force the victim to do something. They have to do the choice. They have to come to the conclusion, and they know best when to call and when to step out of that relationship. So we only can offer information. Look, there is a center like this. You can call, you can get support, you can get information. They'll help you out. You are not alone in this, and you do not deserve this. That's the most that we need to tell as a friend and as a victim to the and never confront the perpetrator, because that can be dangerous also.
Okay, Maro, yes, but I have a question. You said that the victim oftentimes knows best as to what is good for them. However, we know that oftentimes women who are subjects or victims of domestic violence sort of become extremely complacent. They don't know what's right and wrong. They don't know that they don't deserve this. Sometimes even they agree with the perpetrator. They say, oh, you know what? It was my fault. I did this, or my skirt was this way or that way, short or long or what have you. You know, I think last time we talked about Stockholm syndrome, where the victims start actually validating the decisions or the acts of perpetrators, those who are actually abusing them. Can you address that for us, please?
Sure. The longer time the victim stays with the perpetrator, she, as a coping mechanism, she validates the perpetrator. And as a coping mechanism, she, I tell you, all of the victims that come to us, they blame themselves. I am at fault. It is my mistake. I'm the guilty one. And we work very hard, our psychologists work very hard to do away with that guilt feeling that they have. But your question was that how we can intervene in the privacy of a family. And believe me, the issues that you raised are valid for American families. American families also don't want to intervene in their privacy and to step in, for the government to step in, for so forth. But we're talking about a situation that it's a potential danger, lethality, and a situation that it's a human rights violation. By law, it is illegal to abuse another person. So therefore, that we have the responsibility in this case is to intervene, and we must intervene. The issue is here that a traditional Armenian family, has changed over the centuries. I mean, remember, Shakeh, in the 18th century, 19th century, the women were covered their mouth. They're not allowed to speak, right? And we had all sorts of traditions. So tradition evolves. Our tradition right now is not to have a domestic violence family, a family where there is violence. And this we have to eradicate. And for that, yes, we need to preserve the good aspects of the family and do away with the negative aspects. And to tell you frankly, if we don't do it, we perpetuate this in society, because we know that domestic violence is a learned behavior, meaning that children that see this in a family, boys, the vast majority become abusers in their adult life, and the girls, the vast majority, enter into this type of relationships because this is what they see.
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. I was going to actually ask you that question about the long-term impact of domestic violence on children, how it can be learned. The learned reaction could be in terms of the boys, it could be in terms of becoming abusers later on, because they feel that this is normal. This is how families are structured, or how families operate. And for girls, they may think that this is how girls are supposed to go through life. This is what happens. This is what's normal. Therefore, they are more in agreement with domestic violence and how women are supposed to act in that context. And I think you were very correct in saying that this domestic violence is not all that pervasive, but because of it, the nature of the egregious nature of this violence within the family, it damages not only the people who are the direct recipients of this violence, but also many around that violent milieu. I was listening to the police chief of the city of Los Angeles reporting on the fact that during the COVID-19 pandemic, there have been some decreases in calls, emergency calls that have gone to the police system. And in that context, he also mentioned that there has been 11% decrease in the emergency calls pertaining to domestic violence that they have been receiving. But he quickly added, and very correctly so, that this is not a sign of the fact that domestic violence has decreased during COVID-19. In fact, based on their understanding, during this very stressful time, it is very likely that domestic violence occurrences have gone up. It's just the number of calls, emergency calls that go into the system, police system, that have decreased, because many women perhaps think, what is going to happen if I call the police? They're going to call and take me away or take someone away. Where are they going to take me? What's going to happen to me? So it's really important during this time to be cognizant, to be very sensitive to that issue. So let me move forward and ask you another question, Maro. So this domestic...
If I may, let me add something to something that you said that is very important. You know, when we started 10 years ago in Armenia, domestic violence was very much taboo, and nobody talked about that issue, and domestic violence, it did not become public. We have two very public trials, for example, in the United States. It became very public, and from then on, the media started to talk about it. So as with the pandemic, at that time, people were saying that we do not have domestic violence in Armenia. But once it became out in the open, and once the media started to do more coverage, and once there were centers that received calls from victims, then the number of calls increased. And the victims usually, at the last moment, they call the police. They usually prefer to call support centers rather than calling the police. Especially in Armenia, they feel that, you know, it's a shame to bring the police over the father of my children. You know, so, and I want to mention also something very important, that in societies like in Armenia, where older generation lives with the younger generation, the in-laws, we see a lot of domestic violence perpetrated by mother-in-laws towards daughter-in-laws. And this is something that it's very difficult to overcome sometimes. Yes, it's a problem.
Right, Maro, as we're talking about domestic violence, I think it behooves us to also mention that as Armenian women, we think that there is a great deal of positivity and excellence that can be attached to the Armenian family structure. Just because domestic violence happens in some families, it doesn't mean that the Armenian family as a structure is being attacked in these discussions. That is actually the opposite. What we're trying to say here is that the Armenian society is a very protective society. The Armenian family is a very protective structure where people feel safe, people feel proud to belong to go back to. It has warmth and security that people yearn to have and go back to again and again. We're proud of our families. But that doesn't mean that we're blind to some anomalies in the same structures in some families. That doesn't mean that some violence doesn't happen in some families. That's why we're speaking about this. There is no question about the quality, the high quality of the traditional Armenian family. We're we're being vigilant about those families where that high quality of warmth and protection doesn't exist. And in fact, the opposite exists. Do you agree?
Let me say two things. Of course, the family is something in any society of tremendous value, of tremendous security, stability, a place where we develop in the right way, a place where it gives us our roots and our baggage for life. And of course, the Armenian family works in that along those lines as well, a healthy Armenian family. However, I want to point out to certain things that are very detrimental in our families. And that is the fact that we, as a society and in the family, we still teach our children gender stereotypes. You are a girl, you should be, meek, docile, amote, the shameful aspect of things, you should be like this. You are less capable than your brother who is entitled to everything. And this is how it starts, the gender inequality. And this is how the boy, when he grows up, he feels that he's entitled to everything, and he's entitled to control and to exert any power he wants over the wife or the girlfriend and so forth. So there are certain aspects of our families that we need to address. So when you talked about prevention, this is another aspect of prevention. We have to start from very young to combat these gender stereotypes. And I know Armenia is now making is at least a great effort to address textbooks in schools that to cut out those gender stereotypes examples that exist. And the current government, the fact that it appoints a lot of women to government positions, and in parliament the number of women have increased, adhere to that role model that the woman also can be a head of the family, the woman also can be a leader, the woman also can be a political person. So it's important that when we talk about traditional family, we don't refer to those that backward mentality, but to refer to a system of family that has the warmth and the support and the generosity for its family members.
Absolutely, absolutely. So in these talks, what we're trying to do actually is to strike a balance between all of the positive aspects of society, of people, of individuals, of structures, but at the same time, be very vigilant and cognizant of what's wrong, what may be wrong with a person or with a structure, with an organization. So the sign of a smart society is to be able to balance everything, to be able to recognize and nurture and support positive aspects of society, but at the same time, be very vigilant and very attentive towards things that are not right, whether it's in the structure of the family or in an organization.
Absolutely. Because, for example, still taboo. We don't talk, but there are an increase in the statistics of incest, of sexual abuse of children in the families. And if we do not talk about these things, and if we don't address these things, we will never be able to address it as a problem in the society, and to combat it in a way. So it's important, as you said, to talk about the positive, but also be cognizant of the negative aspects that are in the society.
Right, right. So we're now going to open our discussion to questions from the audience, if there may be some. I know Askik Ohanesian was going to deal with the questions that are coming from the audience. Are there any, Askik?
Yes, Shakeh, we have a few questions from our viewers on Facebook. So the first one is, thank you for interesting and important discussion. What about children living with domestic abuse, those who suffer directly?
I think that's a very important question. In fact, we had conversations with psychologists at Maro Center, the Women's Support Center. Actually, Maro, we didn't address the fact that there are two shelters that Maro's structure, Maro's Center, sponsors and manages. The mental health, emotional health, and physical safety of children who are witnesses and also victims of domestic violence were issues that we discussed with psychologists who work for this center. So Maro, I would like to pass on this question to you. What are the short-term and long-term impacts of domestic violence on children, whether they're boys or girls? How does that impact their health, their mental health, their physical health, and their academic performance, their behavior in society in general while they're under that abuse, and then later on in life?
Yes, this is very tragic because I cannot hear you, Shakeh. Okay, this is very tragic because if a woman as an adult can pick up the phone and call, a child usually doesn't do that. And we as members of the society have to identify these cases and bring them to light. And in this respect, the children's and the doctors have to protect the victims, to take them away from these toxic families, and to offer them not only safety and protection, but also services that deal with their trauma. The effects of trauma on the children. So to answer to our viewers' question that what happens to those children, the best thing is to inform the mother that this is something very damaging for the child, and it can have many psychological repercussions. And the best thing to do is to approach a center like ours who has a child psychologist and deal with. The child can develop a lot of traumatic issues. They can stop talking. They can start stuttering. They can start bedwetting at not an appropriate age because their performance. Sometimes they even cut school completely. They don't go to, they don't attend school. We had two very brilliant young girls that now they finished university, and they were saying that they could not study because at the nights there were arguments and they had to be awake at night, and during the day they had to sleep, and therefore they could not do. Eventually they came out, the mother came out with them from that relationship, and now they finished university. But I'm saying that the damage that it creates and the disruption in that family for those children, the children that need encouragement, the children that need support, it's phenomenal. And also added to this is the fact that the mother, because she is under the influence of trauma, of this PTSD disorder, she does not have the patience, she cannot concentrate to spend time with the child, to deal with the child. So that many times the children in these relationships are very much neglected. And we notice when the mothers come to the shelter that they are completely disengaged from their children. And we give parenting skills to them to understand what it is positive education toward the child, because for them, education means beating the child. And punishment is a form of education. And we do not allow it, and we try to tell them on how to do positive parenting.
Right, right. So yeah, disciplining and education, because that's what they're under. They're being punished. They're being disciplined by the perpetrator. I would like us to go back and reflect on PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. I remember several years ago when I was at the Uniformed Services University of Health Sciences Medical School, I was faculty there. Our soldiers who were in medical school, they were being trained to become medical doctors, they went to the Iraq War, and when they came back, they had all these bizarre behaviors and they couldn't function. Their families started falling apart. And we were really trying very hard to understand what was happening to these young men. And what we discovered was that they were suffering from PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. The trauma happens. After the trauma, the impact of the trauma continues. So the behavior and the mental attitude and the psychological structures of these people fall apart. They have flashbacks. They have, in the middle of the night, they wake up with this terrorizing or images and dreams. So going back to what you said, Maro, these kinds of abuses in the family create post-traumatic stress disorder for these children who have witnessed this level of violence in the family. And this continues with them. This goes with them throughout the life, unless they are under therapy, unless a lot of arduous work is done with them. And how many of these children actually have the privilege of having this level of care afterwards? Also with women, as you mentioned, Maro, there are parenting issues. It's not to say that these women are not broken. They are. Their potential for parenting is diminished, because their attention has been taken away from what it is that they should be doing. They are barely surviving. And that's why we really need to pay attention to this. Astrid, are there other questions?
Yes, the next one is how can we bring, sorry, I will mute you. Yes. How can we bring any kind of awareness to domestic violence from diaspora? I follow some accounts on Twitter. Do you suggest any other ideas?
I didn't quite understand the questions. They want awareness raising in the diaspora or from the diaspora to Armenia?
Something like that, yeah. How can diaspora actually help raise awareness about domestic violence and what can be done about that? I think in this context, perhaps you can talk about the fact that you, as an advocate and an activist in this milieu, in the domestic violence area of society, your work between diaspora and Armenia, because you have done a great deal of work in that regard. So would you say?
I should say that We have many followers from the diaspora, and especially United States, I have to say. We also have a lot of professionals who work in this field, whether like Shakeh psychologists or even social workers, counselors, lawyers, judges, even policemen who come and train us or give their know-how in this field, share their information. And also we have a lot of support when the law was to be passed 2-3 years ago. We had a lot of diasporan women asking at that time the president, Serge Sarkisian, to pass this law. This is not acceptable behavior for Armenians. So that pressure, that advocacy from the diaspora to Armenia, it's also very much needed and welcomed. And also I have to say that a lot of people support us financially, because that's also a way of being able to run these shelters, to run the center. And through the activity that we have, we raise awareness in Armenia about the problem with the data-based evidence, meaning that because of the data that we have, because of the evidence that we have, we can point out to the police that this works, this doesn't work. We point out to the Ministry of Justice that this works, this doesn't work, we have to make amendments to the law and so forth. Yes. If you have other questions, Astrid.
Yes, thank you, Marjan. We have 2 more questions, and the next question is, are there facts of trafficking in Armenia?
Would you repeat, please?
Yes, sure. Are there facts of trafficking in Armenia?
Or trafficking. Maro, do we want to address trafficking now, or is that yet another discussion in its own? I think that perhaps, Astrid, we should talk about trafficking in a different show, although I have to quickly add that what Maro was pointing out in terms of gender inequality and the fact that sometimes fathers, brothers, and husbands feel that they own women who are dependent on them. Again, not in the majority of the cases. We have to be very clear about this, but in every society of the world, there are anomalies, there are issues of major concern, trafficking being one of them. So in cases where women are so-called owned by their men, whether they're, again, husband, brother, father, etc., or they, because of poverty, they have to submit to certain acts or certain situations and conditions, yes, I am aware of the fact that there is some trafficking, there was some trafficking, but Maro, would you agree that another show should be devoted to this rather than lumped with domestic violence? Maro? I guess Maro, you are muted.
Yeah, trafficking is a completely different topic. Overlap in domestic violence. We had a case where the bride was taken to Russia and her passport was taken away from her and asked to do all sorts of labor and forced labor. So, and also she was abused by her mother-in-law and her husband. So yes, sometimes there is an overlapping, but by and large, it's a completely different topic. Astrid?
Yes, thank you very much. So then we have the last question. Could you please tell one positive story from your practice related with domestic violence?
Maro, that's yours. You're muted, Maro.
Domestic violence is a very sad, oops, sorry.
It's okay now.
Domestic violence is a very sad topic, and it's working with the victims of domestic violence or working with situations that are very, very dangerous. It's not a happy environment. But what keeps us going is to see the transformation of these women, the women that came out, that were able to come out of an abusive relationship, and to see the transformation that happens to her. And I often tell this story because I've seen it with my eyes, and it's something unbelievable. You know, when women come to our centers, they don't have the makeup, their hair is not washed, they are depressed, they are in shambles. And after a month or so, you know, I come again in the office and I see a woman sitting in the waiting area, and I don't recognize it. I don't say hello because she's completely transformed. She is a woman who is being empowered, a woman who understands her rights, a woman who understands that this is not the life that she wanted to have, and she does not deserve to have that life. And a woman who believes in herself, her self-esteem has been rebuilt, not the constant belittling of the husband telling her that you are nothing and that nobody will pay attention to you. And this woman starts to believe in herself and believes that she can support her family, she can go out there and work and be on her own and be a good parent to her children. So the transformation is huge. I mean, people that came to our shelter or to our center that completely hopeless, they said that I have no place to go. He will find me anywhere I go. He will kill me, this, that, and the other. And believe me, we had cases of really dangerous perpetrators with a lot of power, people that worked in the security system, or policemen, or you know, that they have a lot of clout and a lot of power, and yet these women also were able to lead now a life free of abuse. So the success stories are many, and I have to say, statistically, about 74% of our victims, they do not return to the abuser. So this is a huge success of our center. And I suggest that you go to our website, womensupportcenter.org, and it's both in Armenian and English. And you can see some of the information, and also we have a lot of publications there that you can be informed.
Astik, I'd like to finish by saying the following, actually. One, that although domestic violence is a learned behavior in many cases, it could also be the result of mental health problems in the family. And even if it doesn't start as mental health problem, it becomes a mental health problem as a result of the practice of domestic violence. So that is something to keep in mind. Another issue that I would like to close with has to do with the fact that these discussions are supposed to build the fabric of society, the fabric of community, the fabric of our families. We come to these discussions with one aim, and that is empowering the individual to be able to become an empowered part of the fabric of society, because domestic violence and other forms of violence corrode the fabric of not only the family, but of society. That's why we invest ourselves, we give our time and effort in becoming involved in this discussion out of love and out of concern. And Maro and I, as many know, we are not newcomers to these discussions, and we only conduct these out of love and concern. And that, yes, Maro, go ahead. You have part.
I wanted to clarify one thing about mental health, and that is that only 1% of the abusers have mental health issues. Many think that a person who does that to another woman, he must be sick somewhere. And it's not true. They are very much aware of what they do. They are very much in control of what they do. And we should not consider them as being sick, but they quite the opposite. They are very, very aware of. Shakeh said that it's very accurate, that domestic violence erodes society. And families that live in this situation, first of all, are much more poor because the husband does not allow the woman to go out or to work, or takes the money away from her. We have those are taken away by the husband to cook everything and use to drink or other issues. The family is much more impoverished, and the children, they're also scarred, and they're also potential abusers.
So unfortunately, Maro, some of what you said did not come across, but I guess we would like to complete this.
So
Maro, there's a problem with static. Astrid, is there something we can do about that?
Unfortunately, no. I think it's related with Maro's connection, internet connection.
Okay, then.
I think I had some internet connection issues.
Yes, it is an internet connection. In any case, I think that we've said enough for one time, for one session. We would like to say goodbye to all those who joined us. And we hope that we will have similar occasions to be talking to your audience, Astrid, and thank you for the invitation.
Dr. Kaftarian, Mrs. Matosian, thank you very much. It is the great job that you are doing, and I'm sure that our listeners enjoyed this webinar. I just want to add that we will definitely continue a series of the webinars about healthcare aspects of defying universal fear, and especially we will have the next discussion with Dr. Kaftarian and her colleague Jane Mahakian on Thursday, April 2023. You can watch the recordings of our webinars and follow the new ones through the events calendar on our website, armenia2041.org. And the same you can find on our Facebook page. Thanks again to our speakers, to everyone for joining. Stay safe and bye.
Thank you, Maro, for your major
contribution
to this area. Thank you. Thank you, Astrid, for hosting us. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Congratulations.